Camp Pros. This is Oliver Gregan, Summer and Family Camps Director at YMCA Camp Jewel.
And I'm Matt Hansberger. I'm the executive producer of podcasting at Go Camp Pro, and you are listening to First Class Counselors, a special series of the Camp Hacker podcast brought to you by our good friends at Go Camp Pro.
This series is for the camp directors to give to their counselors as they hire and prepare them for the upcoming summer.
So for our many camp director listeners out there, you'll know that this isn't for you, but we're happy that you're listening anyway. These are for the counselors, those who are coming to change the lives of campers this summer, because we know that the better your counselors are, the more happy your campers will be, and it'll have them coming back year after year. So counselors, this one's for you.
So thank you for tuning into FCC's Quick Show. We're here to cover one specific topic and cover the essentials as fast as we can.
It's the need-to-knows,
the can't go without,
the fundamentals,
the basics. So today we're going to be talking about meal times. You know, it happens 3 times a day, so it has to be important. We want to talk about, it's my favorite thing is eating, but today we're just talking about meals. We're going to talk about meal basics, picky eaters, table games and table topics, how food fights are more of a memory now than a reality, and of course some creative meal plans so you can have fun while you're at the meal. That's out of the ordinary. So listen up, first class counselors. Meals happen 3 times a day. It is one of the most important things that you need to know. So let's get started with just talking about how our meals work. So a lot of camps have different types of dining hall procedures, or cafeteria, or mess hall, whatever you might call it. And we have different ways of serving food and different ways of eating in the dining hall. So we want to talk about that real quick to shoot off the show. So Matt, can you kick us off with how has the dining hall worked for you when you've been a camp director?
Yeah, so I've had the awesome privilege of seeing it work in a bunch of different ways. And my most recent post was at Pierce Williams, which is in the London, Ontario area up here in Canada. And they do buffet style. So part of the reason we're going to talk about this real quick is just to get ourselves on a common lingo about how things work. So buffet style is at some camps, it's where the campers will go up to a table where and then the campers serve themselves food, and then they can maybe sit where they want, or they go back, sit with their cabin. At Pierce Williams, they had a really specific way that I thought was really smart of doing buffet style. So everyone would be outside the dining hall, and then you'd get called in. You'd be lined up as a cabin just to make sure everyone's there, and you get called in as a cabin just so that there was some order and people weren't like crowding the buffet line. But then instead of campers going to a table where they serve themselves, they lined up in front of the kitchen staff or whoever was helping in the kitchen for that meal, and the kitchen staff would hand them their individual portions. So they were able to get the pre-designed portion of pancakes and bacon, then sausage, and then the staff literally will like squirt ketchup on there, so that all the food was like going back to the table and there was no food left on the table. And then there was also what we're going to talk about in this episode. There was an options bar that was available for campers, so that a camper or a staff and a camper could go up to the options bar, and at breakfast it was cereal and maybe some like cottage cheese or yogurt, and then at lunch and dinner it was a salad bar. So there was always an option for campers who might not have enjoyed the main course of the meal, and that was more of a campers could go up and serve themselves, and if they were really, really little, we'd have a staff member help them with that. So that's kind of the basic when we sit. So if we talk about buffet style, that's what we're going for. Oliver, do you want to talk about family style?
Yeah, so I've worked at camps for that, pretty much only used family style. Now, buffet style is not foreign to me. We've used it for outdoor center groups and school groups who have come through who wanted that style of eating. However, the really cool thing that you mentioned is you guys actually served the food. You had somebody who was on staff who was plating everything. I've actually never heard of that really, unless it was like at a school setting for us here in the United States. Typically with us in the States with buffet style, you serve yourself. And we actually see with that, there's a lot more food waste because people like overeat. So I love that idea of having that portion control, and it really can emphasize healthy living right there, because you can see what your portion is supposed to be based off what the kitchen staff or the knowledgeable staff member is able to give you. So that's really cool.
And campers can go up for seconds too, right? In that style, they can go up when, for us, when seconds were called, that was when they could go back into the line. So it wasn't like we were just giving them that portion. Yeah, it was a really good way to control the amount of food going out. And then because the food didn't have to go back into the kitchen, this is for all the directors listening, because the food didn't have to go back into the kitchen, we could actually save it and use it for other meals because it didn't go out and didn't break our health code standards. So there's an added benefit to the buffet style there.
Too true. Yeah, so on the flip side, what I'm used to is family style meals. So something that we do down here pretty commonly, I know I've now worked at 3 camps who have done it, is a family style meal. And this means that you're going to have a waiter who is at your table. Usually you assign them or they volunteer for it because, you know, doing service and helping out your cabin is really a good thing to do. We'll talk about that later. But they go up to a serving window. They get a tray that has bowls, plates, spoons, whatever they need for the meal. And then they bring that tray of food to the table. It's distributed amongst the table. It's passed around the table. And then once the meal is over, everything goes back onto that tray, goes back up to the window, and the kitchen will take care of it, or whoever is doing dishes, whatever it might be. So the really cool part about that is the family style meal allows everyone to sit at the table. There's nobody individually going up to get food. There's one waiter who's in charge of that meal, but everybody else gets to sit down, enjoy the meal, have a conversation for the time that they're there, and then they all clean up and leave together, which is really nice. Matt, do you have something else you want to mention about food?
Yeah, I think when we get for this episode, we're going to cover a bunch of different topics. And like we talk about usually at the start of this episode, it's going to be different for every camp. Oliver and I spent almost an hour before this episode started talking about our different dining hall experiences. So whether the plates are set ahead of time or whether one person's going to get the food, whether you call them a hopper to get the food or a scraper to clean up the plates at the end, you have to take our suggestions kind of with that context that it might be different at your camp, and that's okay that it's different. And our suggestions may or might not work. And you might not have if you're a counselor listening to this, you might not have the ability to make some of these bigger changes. You're not going to be like, okay, we're doing buffet style when our camp only does family style. It doesn't work like that. But we have some tips for you that'll work for both buffet and family style and different styles of dining hall. Because we know that especially when it comes to meals, there's a very specific way that almost every summer camp does it. I've almost never seen it done the exact same way twice. I don't know about you, Oliver.
No, and especially I find with the cleanup process, there's a lot of differences, right? Yeah. With serving food, you can get a little bit creative, and we've talked about maybe 3 or 4 ways that you can do that. But really with the cleanup process, some camps are really regimented, you know, plates, then cups, then forks, right? Or it might be everyone scrapes everything onto one tray and then that tray goes up all at once. So really, and this is important, your camp will probably practice how your meals run during staff training. I really hope they do, because meals are so important at camp. So make sure you pay attention there in those times. Make sure you volunteer to help with the cleanup. Make sure you volunteer to help with getting the food, so you can live that experience during staff training before campers arrive. So you know what the expectations are, how it works. You've been through the ringer, especially if you've never been to that camp before. And if you've never been to camp before and this is happening, don't be afraid to have other staff members teach you how this works. You know, we're going to go through some of the other clues in a little bit, but know your dining hall. It's really, really important. The other thing that we haven't talked about so much, because we've been talking about serving food, is kind of the culture inside of each dining hall, which I think is important. Matt and I really did talk about this a lot before, because I come from a camp that's very large, and when the dining hall is very filled with people, we don't make announcements because we know that we're not going to be able to get that message across to everyone in the dining hall. So we try to keep our dining hall a little bit more low key during meals so that people can enjoy their food. No one gets overwhelmed by loud singing or craziness. Not saying that doesn't happen in our dining hall, but we try to keep our dining hall a little bit more tamed, because 350 people going wild, it can make things a little crazy and a little overwhelming. I'll talk a little bit about some ways you can police that at your camp if that is something that you're thinking about right now. But the other side of it, Matt, if you want to talk about that too, is the side where like your dining hall is a program area. You're singing and dancing. So Matt, do you have anything you want to mention about that?
Yeah, and I think my experience is similar to yours, Oliver, in that it was an emphasis more on the eating and conversations within your cabin. And I agree with that. Meal times are like a program. It's something that you as a counselor need to be facilitating amongst your table. There's a lot of intention that goes into it, and you'll hear that in how we bring up each point in this episode. So my camp experience was always that kind of more calm, cool, and collected. We were allowed to stand on our benches and sing if our table was fully like scraped and wiped down, and that was kind of a privilege you got to do. But that was at the end of the meal. I've been to some summer camps where they sing during the meal, and it's like a full medieval times. is medieval times an American thing or just a Canadian thing?
Yeah, there's one down in Jersey that I can't
Okay.
wait to go to.
Okay, yeah, okay. So there's like a full like entertainment thing going on, and I'm pretty sure the staff never eat because they're always in costume and stuff. And I've seen the happy medium between the two. I think there's benefits and drawbacks to each style. So again, different strokes for different folks. We're not here to tell you how to run your dining hall. We're here to tell you as a counselor how to make the best of that intentional time you have with the people sitting at your table.
Yeah. So as a counselor, just make sure you do understand what that level is in your dining hall and try to figure out while you get there and get a good feel for it. And obviously with every camp, culture changes too. So like sometimes things morph and dining halls might get a little louder one summer, but a little bit quieter another summer. And, it's really up to the discretion of who's that director, who's that leadership staff member, who's going to be leading that area.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some meal basics, some good hints for you while you're in the dining hall that you should know or try to pick up while you're on there. Do you want to go shot for shot with this one, Matt?
Yeah. Start us off and I'll jump in.
All right, cool. My first one is know where the cleaning kit is. Know where the brooms are, know where the dustpans are, know where a mop is if you really need one, know how to clean up a mess. Kids are going to spill, kids are going to make things messy. You don't always have to be the person to clean this, but at least know where you can get the materials that you need in order to help clean it up. If a kid does get sick or something in the dining hall, you probably should be the one, or a maintenance staff member should be the one cleaning it up. Just know, like, sometimes kids don't feel well. Sometimes they're eating food that might be a little bit new to them and their body may not react to it properly. So I'm not saying you're probably going to get a kid who gets sick, but just know you need to know where the stuff is to clean it up in case it happens, or who to talk to. So if you're doing dining hall procedures during staff training, raise your hand and say, hey, where's the broom? Where's the mop? You'll look cooler for it because people will be like, wow, this person knows how to take care of kids. They know what they're expecting. So ask that question, figure out where it is. Matt, what do you got?
Nice. I think so. This is a mindset to have as a counselor when you're walking into the dining hall initially, based on sometimes camps will have assigned seating and sometimes it'll be sit where you want, and that might change meal to meal. But being intentional about where you're sitting and where other staff and campers are sitting. So 3 tips here. 1, if you want to switch up locations where your kids are sitting to make sure that they're talking to everyone, or if there's like issues happening within the cabin, you can get little name cards and use your or another staff member to put them on the table ahead of time so the kids know where they're sitting for that meal. It's worked for me in the past. You as a staff member, you should have a camper on your left and your right. There shouldn't be too many staff at a table because we want to make sure we're spreading ourselves out and not clumping as staff members. And then, so with Pierce Williams with the buffet style, sometimes the staff are going in at different times as the campers were. So the tip that we used was that if you need to reserve a spot, that you could put your water bottle, and the staff water bottles usually have stickers all over them, or your staff name tag at a place setting. And then the staff knew that they didn't need to sit there because there was a staff already at that table, or 2 already at that table. So just make sure you're being intentional about where you're sitting before the meal even starts.
Yeah, I think that's so cool because I know I've worked at camps where the rule is you sit with just your cabin. There's no, like, you go sit wherever you want. And
Right.
One of the big reasons why we do that is so you can track what your campers are eating every day. So just know as a counselor, that's something that you should be thinking about. What are my campers eating? Are they eating every meal? Even if you're doing that spread out. And then the other thing Matt said is having a camper on either side. That's really important. But but know what your tables are in your dining hall. Some camps have round tables and some camps have long rectangle tables. So know that you're spreading yourself along those tables as well. Don't also just sit across from your friends. I know that I catch my counselors doing that all the time. Not hating on you guys if you're listening. Loving you as much as I can. But you know better.
Yeah, good call.
So my little hint here, though, is trying to be the person who eats last. Make sure that there is something on every one of your campers' plates and that they are probably starting eating before you do so. I'm not saying starve yourself. I'm not saying don't eat if a camper is not eating. Make sure you eat during the meal. You need energy just as much as anybody else on that camp. But you got to make sure that all of your campers have some form of an option. We'll talk about picky eaters in a little bit, but it is important for you as a counselor to know that your job is to put those campers first and make sure that they're eating. So the rule of thumb is eat last, all right? But make sure you eat nonetheless. That's my big one.
Yeah, I think that's important. Make sure that you eat too. Like, no one likes a martyr where you say, like, oh, I haven't eaten in 3 days because all my campers got seconds. We used to, kind of one of our rules was that in family style, the camp I grew up at, was that when the tray came out with first on it, that meant everyone at your table, including the counselor, got first. And we would say that the kids wouldn't, a lesson that we taught was that the kids wouldn't actually be able to have seconds until the counselors have had their first as well. That idea that we're a community and we're all eating together. Again, different strokes for different folks, but just don't starve yourselves. Is the lesson there. My next tip is just being aware of the meal timing. It will really help your program director or program coordinator or whatever you want to call that out so that they don't have to constantly be on you to eat faster, or that your kids aren't slow and you're getting to rest hour or getting to the next thing. You want to make sure you're staying on time. And kids need timing reminders when it comes to eating. They might not be used to eating under a schedule at home. Lunches at school are pretty long, and or maybe their breakfast is, they're not used to like timing and structure. So giving them reminders that, okay, it's 10 minutes and that means we're going to start cleaning up our plates in 5 minutes. So we got to get going and we got to keep moving. So you should be a timekeeper. It shouldn't just be up to the directors or leadership staff to keep the timing going.
Yeah, that's a great one. I don't know. Keep a watch on it.
Yeah, man.
Next up for me is be mindful of dietary needs and restrictions of your campers. What can they or can't they eat? Know it and be aware. These are really tough, and you might want to ask these questions during staff training or do a little research yourself. I know that sometimes it's confusing for people who may not have one. Like, I don't have a dietary restriction, so I've been learning about dietary needs as I've kind of gone along, and sometimes it is confusing for people. I know I have a friend who is dairy-free, and people ask all the time if she can have eggs. Yeah, she can have eggs, but it's, maybe you just don't know, and that's fine. It's all important to educate ourselves. But when you're a counselor, it's your job to make sure that the kids who are maybe have an allergy to something are not eating that something. So be aware of what their needs are. But also, it's a sign of respect and care if you know, all right, cool, I have 3 campers who are vegetarian or vegan or have some type of dietary need that they meet, and I'm going to make sure that they have that thing to eat every meal. It shows those campers that you care. It lets other campers know that those life choices are okay and that they can live that lifestyle, and you are going to endorse it. So you're there for them to support whatever their choice is. And I think that's just an awesome thing to do. I remember when I was doing a camp director in British Columbia, every single meal, we had a giant chalkboard up front, and as the leadership staff member, we would do this entertaining display of what the meal was, and every single time we mentioned what the dietary restrictions or needs were for every single thing that we were serving. So we would say that tonight's macaroni and cheese does have dairy in it, but don't worry, we have a dairy-free mac and cheese, and we would just have a lot of fun with it too. So be mindful of dietary needs and restrictions.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and I think, Oliver, you mentioned this briefly, but like that dietary need or restriction or choice is the camper's own to have, right? That it's not open for discussion. If a kid is allergic to peanuts, they don't need to explain what has peanuts in it to the rest of their cabin. And you can model that by saying, so I'm a vegetarian. I choose to not eat meat. And when a camper asks me about it, I say, like, what do you want to know? And then I usually say, like, I'm okay talking about this, but remember that not everyone might be. I just use that lesson just to make sure that we're being respectful to people who might have allergies. Because being a vegetarian, for me, it's a choice. I can talk about it. But for someone who can't, one of my best friends is allergic to tomatoes. And I don't want to grill her constantly about not being able to eat pizza. She already realizes that, she misses eating pizza. So I don't need to remind her of that. I think another thing in the idea of being mindful is just remember that meal times can be stressful for campers, and also that campers can give you a lot of information during mealtime. So it's not your time as a counselor to tune out during meal times. You should always be making sure you're still gathering that data on your kids. So which campers are, kind of just pushing their food around and not eating much? Which of them look sad? Which of them are making connections with their friends? Because that could mean a lot of different things, and not just how great their day was. When we talk about the very, very serious subject of child abuse, we talk about how some of the signs are kids hoarding their food because maybe they don't get a lot of food at home, or kids not eating because maybe they have an eating disorder, or there's been some like trauma when it comes to food in their past. So just make sure you're keeping your eyes and ears open, because it can go beyond just a picky eater, which again we'll talk about in a second. So just make sure you're gathering that data and being aware and remembering that it's not your time to tune out during meals.
My next hint is limit the number of campers you have up from the table at a time. You can do this in a lot of different ways. You can do it in your head and just kind of keep track and say, oh, we got 2 up from the table right now. Let's not let everybody just run off. This is especially important during cleanup times, so I have a hint for in a little bit, but try to keep everyone seated at the table until it's time to go. This helps you keep track of where your campers are at all times. A lot of camps will do something funny where they'll have like a canoe paddle or a giant brick or something strange that they carry to and from the bathroom. Some camps will do like a little flag that they put up at their table so people know that there's someone at the bathroom. That way they're not bringing germs to the bathroom on that like paddle over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever your camp does, see if there is something like that. If not, just do something small for your table, because that little table can still be your little micro society of, oh, my table has this paddle and this is how we go to the bathroom, or this is how we go up to get extra food. Also, if you bring the paddle up for extra food, it might be really challenging because it's super big and if you're trying to carry food in a paddle. But think about what would work for your table and what you would want to do so that you can keep some organization at your table for who's up and who is down.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think my last kind of tip in this section of the podcast is that remember where kids are coming from when it comes to meal times. And this is kind of, again, why it's important for you to be on as a camp staff, because less and less, I think kids are having the experience at home where everyone's eating together as a family, or that they're conversing together as a family. So this might be incredibly weird for them, right? How many restaurants have you gone out to recently and seen where kids are just staring at phones? And maybe you do that too. And I'm not here to shame you for that. I personally, my partner and I eat a lot of meals watching Netflix, and that's just, that's our home dynamic. But at camp, it's so important that we have that opportunity to be together as a group of people and make conversation and talk with each other and laugh and joke and those kinds of things that, I think, remember what you're up against, that society has made a great example of a place where kids don't have to talk to each other. So let's be counterculture a little bit. And you as a counselor really have to lead that, because kids might not know any different, and that's okay. But, we have to be the example there.
Yeah. I have 3 more small basic things that you can do in the dining hall to help out. The first is ration your bug juice or your juice or whatever extra beverage you have going on in the dining hall. Get those kids drinking water first. It is so important to hydrate, and the dining hall is the place to do it. So say for every 2 pitchers of water we could have 1 pitcher of bug juice for the table. Hydration is important. Make sure you do it. The next is cleaning up. For the love of the great camp director above, please do this well in the dining hall. Wipe down your tables, sweep underneath afterwards, make sure your table is clean, make sure it's ready for the next meal when you leave for this meal. Maybe you don't have to set the table for the next meal, but make sure it's nice and tidy and clean. There's probably somebody else on camp, a maintenance staff member, who goes through there and cleans afterwards, and they deeply, deeply appreciate when it is not a giant messy dining hall. Also, it's just a cleanliness area on camp that's really important to keep up. And if there's gross tables, it does not reflect well as a camp as a whole. And then the other important thing is the dining hall is an excellent area to teach your campers respect for the work of other people. There's an amazing kitchen staff who cook 3 square meals a day for every kid on camp. So however big your camp is, it doesn't matter. That's huge. They're in a hot kitchen during the summer cooking those meals. They do an amazing job. Please emphasize to your campers how awesome your kitchen staff is. Teach them to say thank you to them. Teach them to be appreciative of the food that's being cooked for them, and whatever you want, and in whatever way you or your camp wants to do that, make sure you do it. I like to say, be daily courteous to the kitchen staff, and at least once a session, have your cabin do something nice for the kitchen staff. It could be writing cards that they can hang up in the kitchen as like, thank you for cooking the food. It could be giving them some type of a present, like your cabin could do an arts and crafts assignment and or an arts and crafts project as like a sculpture of kitchen stuff, so that they know that you appreciate them. Also, another one is, just because they're not the only support staff on camp, this is just a quick shout out to the maintenance team as well. See if your kids can do something nice for the maintenance team as well. Say thank you to them, because they also make sure the water's running, the heat is going, the fans are on, the air conditioner works, whatever it might be for your camp. They make sure that it is not broken. So thank those guys too. This is just a special service announcement for that support staff at your camp. Thank them. It's great for your campers to learn that skill. Cool. With that being said, let's talk about picky eaters. People who don't want to eat food. Let's see. Let's just kick it right off, Matt. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I think Oliver, we're in the same boat that like being a picky eater has never been my problem. Well, and I love food. Food is so good. And I think, you know what, the reason why I am not a picky eater, I want to give a shout out to Kathy Hansberger here. My mom, in our household growing up, we had a rule called the no thank you helping. And that was basically that if there was a new food and you didn't want it, you had to have what was called a no thank you helping. You could say no thank you, and you had to have one bite of it and chew it a couple times, and you didn't even have to swallow it. You could spit it out into a napkin and throw it in the dumpster, or you could go throw up in the toilet. I'm not saying you should say that to campers, but that was my household rule. But you had to at least try it. And I think that really helped me as a person not be scared of trying new foods. And I really think there's just a lot of anxiety with kids and with their parenting styles, sometimes too, of not wanting their kids to feel uncomfortable, that we don't have kids who are trying new foods. So we instituted that on a camp-wide policy at one of the camps that I worked at, and we got everyone to try no thank you helpings. I don't think my mom was ever more proud than when I brought that to a camp. But it was really cool to see campers actually trying things. And it was always kind of funny when we gave them a napkin and they could spit out the food if they didn't like it. And I really think you as a counselor need to be an example of that. You need to be like kind of hard and fast when it comes to this, and I'll talk about that in a second, but your example sets the tone for trying new food, and that whole thing around picky eating. So just remember that you have the power, and a no thank you helping is a great way, because they don't even have to swallow it. But and here's the other thing is, if a camper's like, well, I've already tried that and I know I don't like it, my mom would say, Kathy Hansberger would say, well, your taste buds grow, so they might have changed. So we're going to do a no thank you helping anyway. And it was only until like last year that I started liking squash, because I remember gagging at the kitchen table as a kid, and now I like squash. So your taste buds do grow, folks.
There you go. Yeah, I like I like the shout out to the mom. On that side note, I always tell the kids that, camp food is not your mom's cooking. So at the end of the day, take small portions, try it out first, go from there, because, pasta at camp may not be pasta that mom has. So you can portion control a little bit that way. You can always go up for seconds if you like it.
Yep.
Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about picky eaters here. The first thing is, if you can, get a copy of the menu for your cabin. This might be just the next days, or maybe the next 3 days, or whatever it might be. Sometimes it's a little tough for kitchen staff to make sure that menu is the exact same that they planned at the beginning of the session. There's a lot of things they worry about with like food orders and all that coming in. So please, if there was supposed to be cornbread in a meal that is set on the schedule and there was no cornbread, I guarantee you there's probably a reason there's no cornbread that was out of their control. So don't freak out too much. But see if you can get that menu that you can read off to your schedule, read off to your cabin, and let those kids know what's coming up. You'll get a good idea of what they want to eat, so you can kind of front load, like, it says asparagus here, and I know my kids aren't going to like asparagus. So you kind of get that ahead of time, but also that gives kids ownership. They know what the meal is going to be, so they can kind of start to plan, Oliver told me this morning that there was going to be asparagus at dinner tonight. I guess I'm going to have to go to the salad bar. That's cool, right? Or they might have that conversation with you, so you can think about it ahead of time and be like, well, you know what? If you don't want to go to the salad bar, maybe I can figure out, something else that the kitchen can get for you. Like, you are prepared. It's always better to know ahead of time. It's front loading, all that good stuff. We've talked about it 1,000 times. Just try it. And then the other one I say is be creative with the food that you eat. Have a deconstructed sandwich. Use the ingredients that were given in the meal to make something else. It might be something as simple as, taking lasagna and taking apart the layers. So now it's just like a pasta bolognese instead of like a big chunky baked piece of lasagna that the kid doesn't want to eat. So now they get normal pasta that they're comfortable. Because for kids, a lot of the time eating is a visual thing. It's not an actual taste thing. They're still getting used to what things look like. And if they look strange, they're not going to want to eat it. So sometimes it's just switching things up. With that being said, don't be too creative. One time as a camp director, I wanted to do a colorful food day. We food colored all the food for like our weekend programming, and it didn't turn out as well as I was hoping. So everyone was a picky eater that day. But nonetheless, you can be a little creative with your kids and make sure that they can have a good meal. They might be more willing to eat if it's not exactly what they didn't want in the first place. Matt, you got something?
Yeah, I think we're gonna start getting into talking about like alternatives for meals, and like what your kitchen staff can offer. So before we kind of get into that, because this is something that's really different for every camp, I really want you to listen loud and clear to this point. That you need to know your camp's policies when it comes to campers getting special meals, because nothing is worse than promising a kid that the kitchen can just whip you up a peanut butter and jam or a soy nut butter and jam or a bread and butter sandwich if they can't do that. So make sure you know what the policies are surrounding that. So one way that we've kind of mentioned a couple of times is having an options bar at your camp. And again, you as a camp director or a camp counselor might not have control over that, but a lot of camps will have some sort of set aside special option that campers can have. So at Pierce, it was a salad bar that was really well stocked, like 3 kinds of dressing. We called it our world famous salad bar and really, really talked it up so that kids would know that they could go and they could have some lettuce and croutons and cheese, which are pretty agreeable foods for most kids. But we trained our staff never to promise that the kitchen staff can give them something extra, because sometimes they couldn't. It was just a salad bar. There was a fruit bowl sometimes, but that was it. And if you find that your campers if we found that our campers continuously were denying all of that food, our policy was one thing where we would say, okay, well, let's wait a meal. And when that kid is hungry, they'll ask for something and they'll eat fruit or they'll eat that thing, so that we're not setting that policy of every kid going up to the kitchen. And we just made sure we said, hey, let our head counselor know when this kid has been either like getting close to missing a meal or something like that, just because the kid might go home and talk about that. So you want to make sure you're knowing that as a director within your leadership staff. So, but again, I think Oliver's got some other points too, but just follow your policies, please.
Yeah. And definitely on that point, another thing is being a creative counselor and going out and spending your own money and buying food that that camper will eat. I can speak maybe as a camp director, probably don't do that.
I agree.
Yeah, just because, camp promises that they're going to cook food for those kids. You don't know if you're going to accidentally buy something with an allergen for that child. Also, it's your money. Please, you don't make a lot of money as a summer camp counselor in the first place in most cases. So please, I understand your desire and care for that child. Please don't do that. And another thing is, from an outside perspective, that will 100% look like grooming to a camp director. It will look like you're going out of your way to try and treat that camper with a little bit of something extra special. So as caring as an individual as you might be trying to be in that moment, please hold back from it. I understand where your intentions come from, but your actions are saying something different. So just something I want to put out there for the creative thinkers who really care.
No, that's a great point, Oliver. That's good.
So let's get into those side options. We talked about the peanut butter and the jelly side that is sometimes available. Sometimes it's not peanut butter. Sometimes it's sun nut butter, which is another fantastic option, and it's allergen free for those kids who might be allergic to peanuts. But there's also typically a salad soup bar is available. I think most camps are starting to do this because they do know kids are picky eaters and they do know allergies have become really a big pressing issue that parents are concerned about. So you probably will have something at your camp. Just make sure the kids aren't eating the same thing over and over and over again, right? If a kid eats salad for 5 days straight, that's not actually a healthy option. It's actually a little concerning. If you know what your kitchen has on the menu as well, so if you have that menu in your cabin, you've been going over it, you might know what's in reserve, right? So if a camper really liked one meal and then you get into the next meal and the kitchen, they're not willing to eat that, you might be able to go up to the kitchen and say, hey, do you have any lasagna from last night that we can warm up and give to them instead? I sometimes will go with like a simple bowl of cereal because it's really easy. I know the kitchen can grab it real fast. Those are a little bit good things to do. Understand that your kitchen is trying to serve a lot of people during a meal. So they are concerned about serving all those other people. And when you come up with that one child, it's like, they couldn't just eat the thing we made. So be considerate of what your kitchen is doing. If you're a support staff member who's listening to this, which is a possibility, just know that, that counselor is also trying to feed this kid who is just being a picky eater at the time. So everyone is stressed. Just be considerate of others. I like to say, don't yuck my yum. Couldn't be a camp director if I didn't say it. If you have a picky eater and they're looking at something that they don't like, and they're sitting there going, that's disgusting, that's gross, that could spread to the rest of the cabin. So one of the first things I like to say to kids is, don't yuck our yum. Like, we like this, and we're going to enjoy it, but let's find you something that you enjoy, because we're not going to yuck your yum either. We talked about, not my mom's cooking, make sure you keep that portion control. But that's an important thing as well for making sure that campers are taking what they like, and they're not going to eat too much of it, because a camper who may be a picky eater may say, like, ooh, I'm going to eat all of the carrots in the salad bar, right? But then they get back and the salad doesn't taste like the carrots that their mom buys, because who knows? I would figure all carrots taste the same, but you never know. So make sure campers are taking the right portion size for them. If they are a picky eater, sometimes you see them go in that opposite direction where they take everything that does taste good to them. Mm-hmm. And then just emphasize healthy foods. Matt shouted out earlier about this idea of the world's greatest salad bar. A lot of the times the healthy foods are the things that the kids don't want to eat. It's where they're becoming picky. So make the healthy stuff cool. Be the cool person who eats them too. You should eat healthy as well. You're working a summer camp. You're out in the sun all day. Get some food inside your belly that is going to give you good nutritional calories. All right. Those are my big points for picky eaters. Matt, do you have anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think it's good. I think it's just, again, the example that you said is so important in pretty much everything that we will talk about on this podcast ever. Your example makes a big difference.
Cool. All right. Let's move on then to table games and topics. How can you keep your table entertaining for your campers while they're there? We've talked about the family style, how it's important to have those conversations at the table, even if it is buffet style, that we're still at a table. We're still conversating about what's going on. So super important there. So let's talk about a few games. A lot of the times games are meant to be fun with a reason. So if your camp may have a game that may attack a camper for having bad manners, or maybe not doing something at a table that's expected, like putting their elbows on the table, or like if they spill something or something like that, please remember that the games are meant to have fun at the table. They're not meant to pick on a camper who has made a mistake. So think about the game, think about the reason why we play the game. And if this is a tradition at your camp, you don't have to go all out and challenge it, but just think about it. Like, is that something that we want to practice at my table here in the dining hall? And it's totally okay if you say to your cabin of kids, like, hey, we're not really going to play that this year. It's just not something our table's going to do. You don't need to challenge tradition. You don't need to call them out on it, because you're going to start a debate amongst children, and that's not always great. But you can say something along the lines of, like, hey, our camp's going to dial that back a bit. Mm-hmm. On the other note, if you are the table that gets really wild and crazy and having fun games, as I have been guilty to do, and I could tell some great stories about how I got in trouble doing this, just remember to dial it back. Sometimes don't go too far. You'll get the whole camp going.
I think that's like a First Class Counselors After Dark episode where we explained all the ways that we got in trouble.
Yeah, that will check out that episode in February. I don't know.
Camp in the 90s. Yeah.
Matt, do you want to shoot one out real quick?
Sure. I have some activities that are good for conversation, and because I find that sometimes, it's like we said, if Netflix is entertaining, or if Paw Patrol is entertaining your meals, you might not know how to talk to people. And sometimes you as a counselor might not be comfortable with that too. And that's totally cool. So here are 3 things you can do to promote conversation at your table. 1, you can ask really easy, open questions. My go-to when I don't know what to say to a kid is, what was the best thing you did today? Or if you could only do one activity at camp for the rest of your life, what would it be? Or if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? Just those questions where they can, give you an answer, and then you can ask questions about that thing. Or if they say, I would only do archery for the rest of my life, I'd be like, oh, tell me about archery. What did you do in archery at camp? Just start the conversation from there. You can also use, I remember one of the counselors I worked with brought a little pack of kids Trivial Pursuit cards. So it had just like little quiz questions on it, and they could just ask, fun facts and quiz questions with your table, and then that can spark conversation. one thing that I made, which was a really a good use for me as a counselor, was I called them table toppers, and it was because in the program room at camp we had 4 different colors of dice, so it was like purple, red, blue, and green. And what would happen is there was a laminated sheet that I made that I put on my table, and on from 1 to 6 in each color, it had a different icebreaker question with like different topics. So like blue dice was all about superheroes, red dice was like what's your favorite. um Purple dice was like would you rather, obviously appropriate questions. And then so campers could choose the throughout the meal. The rule was that everyone had to roll at least 1 dice once. And if everyone did that, then that was what you're supposed to do. And those just prompted, it was like a game that prompted questions. So it wasn't just you asking constantly, the kids would ask it to each other. So it was just a way to spark conversation. And I remember some meals where we would get in trouble for going too long in a meal because we were just asking each other questions, or it sparked really funny conversations. So if you're interested in one of those table topper sheets, I think I still have one on my computer. I can send it over to you. Yeah, if you remember to do that, send me an email and I'll send you my table topper sheets.
No,
Oliver, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a few games, and the first thing I want to emphasize before, and I think I talked about it a little bit, but make sure your camp allows these games. I know that in the past, a lot of these games, and like Matt just said, camp games after dark, sometimes these are games that have been canceled at a lot of camps because somebody probably took it a little too far, right? It just was too much. So remember, when you play these games, they're meant to serve a purpose. Don't go too far on them. So like one of my favorite games when I was a camp counselor back in the day was just freeze, right? And this was all meant to get campers to pause what they're doing, what they're eating. And then as a camp counselor, you'd go around and you'd like put bologna like on another piece of food for them. You'd like flip their plate upside down. Like you would not make a mess, but you would change things up a bit. But the whole idea was that you would get to see that every camper was eating. You get them to tone down a little bit for about a second if they were getting a little too crazy. I think the problem came with this game was things went a little too far and counselors started. I had one occasion of a counselor putting ketchup in a camper's ear, which is a bad idea, right?
Yeah,
Tough to get
don't
out.
do that.
So remember, your job is to have fun with these kids, not torture them. And the game freeze is really meant for you to get a good idea of what's going on at your table and to be able to walk up and down and see everything. So don't go too crazy. Don't make too big of a mess, but it's a good way for you to check on your table and see how everything's doing. You can also, we talked about this in transitions, you can do this on the trail, you freeze, and that way everyone can catch up to each other. Another good game to play at your table is waterfall. So this is a really classic game where you take a pitcher of water, you hold it over the table, and you count 5, 4, 3, and then you slowly, and then eventually you tip the water and it starts to pour out, and campers have to try and catch the water with their cups. This is a good game for making sure kids are hydrating at the table, and it's where it stems from. But again, sometimes people forget that these games are meant to hydrate, and counselors will spill water all over the table and make a huge mess, and it gets out of control. So I say a really good trick is put like some napkins down below just before you're actually pour, or a little bowl. So when you actually do start to pour, if the campers don't catch it or something, it's going to get caught on those things beneath. Make sure that your camp allows this game as well. Trivia food pass. If you have those trivia cards that Matt was just talking about, you can pass food by asking trivia questions, which is always really good. You can print them off or just grab some Trivia Pursuit cards. Another one that I liked is sometimes you can do a trading meal. So you can look at the table next to you and be like, I'll trade you 4 pieces of bread for 3 forks. And the whole idea is you trade with another table and you try and get some of their belongings, so then they have to eat with their hands instead of having a fork, or you trade them for their water. Don't if you are a counselor, make sure they still get their food and everything they need, but it's a little bit of a fun game to trade things around. There's another version of it where you do it for a whole meal, and every team or every table gets their own product, and then they trade to other people. But it's a big meal, and it's a lot to think about. It's a camp director call probably on that one. And then I just love asking dumb questions at the table that create great debates. In my friend's office right now, on his back wall, we have this question in a graph as the answer, and it is cereal a soup? And we have an entire graph that we broke down. Is it a soup? And it's insanely beautiful. If anybody emails me or texts me or whatever, we'll give our things in the show notes. I will send you a picture of this and you will be impressed. And I will explain how it works. It is the most campiest graph I've ever seen. It's just with marker on a giant pad, but it's hilarious. But there's like time of in milk to soup ratio. So if cereal, you know how it gets soft when it's in milk too long. So it's outside of the soup box until a certain time period. It's crazy. But
awesome.
other dumb questions will really get kids going. So will it taco, right, is another great one. Is water wet was a big thing that was on the internet a long time ago. Can it hot dog? Is a hot dog a taco? Is a taco a hot dog? Favorites, least favorite things. If I had $1 billion, how would I spend it? But as you say how you spend it, you have to say what the cost of the expenses are that you spend. Your kids actually get a really good idea of how much $1 billion is actually. It's a really good, fun conversation. The one thing that I do say stay away from at your table, and I'm guilty of this as a counselor, and I've grown up since then, please stay away from eating competitions. This is just a policy that I've had because I've seen campers get sick from eating too much, right? The 1,000 taco challenge or the 1,000 hot dog challenge, please, eating competitions, a little risky as a camp director in my mind, but if your camp allows them, do it safely, please. Matt, do you have something else?
Yeah, my last one here would be that. So some camps that I've heard of so hopping is when, like Oliver was saying, being a waiter or waitress or server, and scraping is when you scrape all the food onto one plate so it's easier to clean. I know that some camps do hopping and scraping games, and anyone who anyone who has worked with me in the past knows my belief about hopping and scraping games. So sometimes those games they'll use like freeze, like Oliver was saying, or a different game to decide who's going to be the person to hop or scrape. And this is just 100% my personal belief, is that that we should always be teaching kids to serve our community, and that it's a good thing to help each other. So, and if you do it where there's a hopping and scraping game, you're teaching them that it's a punishment to help each other. So that's the reason why I haven't allowed it at the camps that I've worked at. It wasn't allowed, and that was my influence as a camper too. It wasn't allowed when I was a camper. A cool thing to do otherwise was at a conference or a workshop that I went to, if you took your tables, plates, and stuff back to the kitchen, somebody was waiting by the door with, they call it a community pin. And basically it was literally just a safety pin with little tiny beads threaded on the safety pin. And everyone wore a name tag at this conference, and you just clipped that safety pin to your name tag. And that was your little like reward for helping the community. It's beads and a safety pin, people. It's not like you're getting a $5 gift certificate. It's really simple, but it was that like positive reinforcement for helping the community and teaching kids that lesson that it's a good thing to help your community. You're not always going to get a reward, but it's kind of the opposite of that scraping games mentality. So, and if you do have a hopping and scraping and you don't want to do those community pins, just make a schedule. It's something as simple as that, that you can say, okay, Billy's going to hop this day, Timmy's the next day, and Sammy's the next day, and then you have a rotating hopping and scraping schedule so that everyone gets to do it at the same time. So, yeah.
And then the coolest of all games would be a food fight in the dining hall.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not. Oh, we tricked you. We gotcha.
Yeah. Food fights were this thing in like 90s like camp movies for sure. I don't think I can think of a camp movie that doesn't have some type of food affair where things just get messy. It's not a food fight, but I always think of heavyweights like halfway through the movie where they've taken over, and this is a spoiler, but they like raid the kitchen and cover themselves in whipped cream and chocolate sauce, and that's crazy. But yeah, food fights are a waste of food, right? In today's world, please don't waste that much food. They're also a big mess, and I've also, from somebody who's been in a food fight, who's a close friend of mine, told me that he was bullied during a food fight. He was like a younger camper and was hiding under a table, and then some older campers found him and like threw mashed potatoes or whatever the meal was in his face. So yeah, if you think you're going to be the cool counselor and start a food fight, that is a good way to get reprimanded. So please don't start a food fight. If your camp is one that does food fights, I would love to hear about it. But but that doesn't mean you can't be creative and try to think of some type of other alternative, right? One event that I remember doing as a counselor is we made pizza and we did like a flour fight, and the flour was really easy. to clean up. Don't, as long as you use like dustpans and stuff, don't use water or it just kind of becomes a goo. But it was a lot of fun, and we made pizza, and it was a good time, and we cleaned up our mess afterwards. But it wasn't a food fight where we were really wasting food. So think of that creative solution. And I've been trying to think of a creative one, and the only thing I think about is like getting all these tarps in the dining hall and covering everything from top to bottom, which I could only imagine the expense of in the first place. But if your camp director wants to risk it for the food fight, let him go ahead and do it. But it's a trick. Don't do a food fight.
Well, I think it's really just getting to the idea that like a food fight is like lazy programming. You're just like, I'm gonna take this thing and throw it at people. It's like you could at least be playing dodgeball, which has some structure and you're not wasting tons of food. And I think to kind of tie this up, I think Oliver, you said it earlier. It's just about the why behind the things that we do, right? So the reason, and I didn't tell people that we're not doing scraping games anymore. Period. I said, we're not going to do scraping games because we want to. We want to teach kids that it's good to help the community. The perfect example of that is, I want you, if you're listening, to picture your camp dining hall. It's, it's kind of quiet. There's some conversation happening. And then out of the corner of your eye and ear, you see a whole tray of food drop on the ground. Some kid is taking it back to the kitchen and it drops on the ground. What is and what do you hope your camper's next action to be? And I really hope that action isn't to either applaud them or to say, Opa, or something like that. Because I want you to think about what that teaches or what the lesson is behind that. Because I had a great camp director who said that the first thing you should do is go and help that person. And if you're not going to go help that person, then you sure as heck shouldn't put them on the spot and make them feel bad for making a mistake. So I think it's just in all of these things, we're teaching kids to be respectful and kind. If people are making announcements in your dining hall, if that happens, then you should be listening. You should get your campers to listen because, again, the example that you set really, really, really matters.
Yeah. All right, sweet. And just for those of you guys that are listening, if you go and check out these show notes, we do have a list of other creative meal plans and fun things that you can do. We'll probably do a podcast about them at some point because we just have a lot and they're a lot of fun. But for now, that's our show, and check out the show notes if you want to. But it's time to get ready for next summer. So Matt, what are you going to be doing to get ready for summer 2020?
Yes, that's right. So for some reason this week I found myself in the grocery store 3 times. Once because I thought we had enough for a meal, and then we had to go get something, and then I went tonight to do a shop for the weekend, and we were talking about food, so my brain was kind of thinking about what are we teaching kids when it comes to food? And I love that, Oliver, we're on the same page about being really, really intentional about not wasting food. So what I want you to do as a counselor this week is when you go to the grocery store or when you're eating this week, I want you to really think about things like how hard it is to buy food that isn't packaged in plastic, or how many people don't use reusable shopping bags or use those little small plastic bags that they put produce in. And I want you to think about those small, easy ways that not only you can help the environment, but you can shape your worldview and your experiences to pass on to campers. When you start noticing these things, it's really hard to not notice them. And it's taken my partner and I a long time to buy enough to have reusable bags and reusable produce bags and reusable straws and those things. But I wouldn't have learned that if it hadn't been for somebody telling me. And campers might not experience that at home. Maybe their parents always use plastic grocery bags when they go to the grocery store. So if you can teach kids about where their food comes from and all those great things, but it's more genuine if you have that lived experience first. So think about this week until our next episode, think about your global impact when it comes to eating and going to the grocery store.
Yep. Sweet. That's such a good get ready because it has a world impact on it. Mine is, if you are going to eat your next meal, do it a little bit shorter and try to get that table to about chest level so that when you're eating, you have to reach over the top and grab things. This is a shout out to, I think, something that Beth Allison talks about in in her Camp Code podcast, but it was such a cool thing that I heard about. I never really thought about it, but kids are tiny and it's really hard for them to reach over things and grab stuff when the table's right there in their chest. So I love that idea that you got to learn that for kids, that's tough to do, and to put yourself in their shoes, which is something I love to do. You pay attention to some of my other get readies, but try to like reach over things, put your chest down at table level and try to eat a meal like that. And you'll really start to understand why campers are constantly trying to stand up at meals, or why they're sitting in weird positions, like with their foot under their butt so they can get a little taller to reach things, or why they like knock over water and stuff all the time. So put your head into the mind of a camper, eat a meal where you're down like this if you're watching YouTube, and you can learn to eat as a little bit shorter of a person.
Oh, that's good. I like that one.
Yeah, thank Beth for that one. That's not me.
She's pretty smart. They give, and we're not just giving them a shout out because they gave us a shout out on their last episode, which was like the coolest moment ever for us.
I know positive reinforcement is great, but positive reinforcement from someone that you may or may not look upon as a hero is fantastic.
Shout out to the Camp Code podcast.
All right, cool. Matt, if somebody's listened to the show and they want more from you, how are they going to get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me anytime by emailing me at Matt, that's MATT, at gocamp.pro, or you can find me on Instagram at Iscus, which is my camp name, ISCUS. I recently made the decision to make my Instagram not a private account anymore because I don't post anything spicy anyway. I just post about, my partner and food and dogs and so it's all good. Follow me on Instagram and tell me about the podcast that you like. Here's the challenge. I usually send a challenge for people so I know people are listening to the show. What I want you to do is send me a DM on Instagram with the poop emoji. That's it. My favorite emoji. Just send that emoji to me and I'll send you something special.
Yeah. If you want to get in contact with me, you can simply just go to Oliver.Gregan. That's GREGAN at GHYMCA.org, or you can just hit me up on Facebook. It's just my name, Oliver Gregan. You can find me on Messenger. I love answering questions. I love talking camp, so please do so. So if you did enjoy today's episode, we'd be so grateful if you left us a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only tell us what you like about our show, but what you don't like about our show, and it helps us boost our rankings and helps people discover what we do here.
That's right. And remember that you can find our show notes and all some more goodness and details at camphacker.tv/podcast. There's lots of great stuff there, and from our show and other Go Camp Pro podcasts like Camp Code out there. So we'd be appreciative if you check that out and read the show notes. Oliver and I do put some work into those to make sure that they're useful for you. So we hope that you check those out too.
Thanks for listening, friends. Camp is camp, and camp's all good.